When most people hear about the Pharisees and Sadducees, they think of the villains in the gospel narratives, the religious leaders who opposed Jesus. But this surface-level understanding misses the profound complexity, political intrigue, and surprising truths about these two groups that shaped not only ancient Judaism, but the very foundations of Christianity itself. What if I told you that without the Pharisees, Christianity might never have survived? What if the Sadducees weren't just religious conservatives, but represented the wealthy elite protecting their power? Let's uncover the secrets you weren't taught. Here's where it gets wild. Contrary to popular belief, the Pharisees were the religious revolutionaries of their time, the innovators, not the rigid traditionalists. The Pharisees believed in the oral Torah, the idea that God gave Moses not just the written law, but also oral interpretations that evolved with each generation. This was radical. They believed faith should adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining core principles. They introduced concepts like the resurrection of the dead angels, demons, and divine providence, ideas not explicitly found in the Torah, but which would become central to Christianity. The Pharisees were the people's party. They democratized religion, teaching in synagogues, making faith accessible to ordinary Jews, not just the temple elite. They were the rabbis, the teachers, the community leaders who lived among the people. But here's what they never tell you in church. The Sadducees weren't just theologically conservative, they were the aristocratic elite protecting their wealth and political power, temple politics, and Roman collaboration. The Sadducees controlled the temple in Jerusalem, which wasn't just a religious center, it was an economic powerhouse. The temple treasury was massive, and the priestly families who controlled it were incredibly wealthy. Here's the shocking truth. The Sadducees collaborated with Roman authorities to maintain their position. They were pragmatic political operators who saw the temple system as their source of power and weren't about to let religious reform threaten it. They rejected the Pharisees' oral tradition because it threatened their monopoly on religious authority. They only accepted the written Torah, specifically the 5 books of Moses, which conveniently emphasized the importance of the priesthood and temple sacrifices. Watch closely because this is where it all clicks together. Pharisees believed in resurrection of the dead angels and spirits exist, divine providence and fate, oral Torah, alongside written religion accessible to all prayer over sacrifice. And Sadducees believed in no resurrection, death is final, no angels or spiritual beings, human free will, no fate. Only written Torah counts. Temple worship is central, priestly authority supreme. These theological differences weren't just academic debates, they were about who controlled Judaism. The Sadducees' rejection of resurrection and afterlife meant people had to find meaning in this life specifically through temple worship, which they controlled. The Pharisees' belief in the afterlife and divine justice gave hope to the poor and oppressed, reducing the temple's monopoly on religious meaning. Okay. Buckle up because this next part is going to shatter everything you thought you knew. This is the secret that shocks most people. Jesus had far more in common with the Pharisees than with the Sadducees. The uncomfortable similarities. Jesus and the Pharisees both taught resurrection of the dead. The Sadducees mocked this belief, Mark 12:18-27. Synagogue teaching. Jesus taught in synagogue, a Pharisaic institution, not a Sadducean one interpretation method. Jesus used rabbinic techniques of legal interpretation, common among Pharisees' social justice. Both emphasized care for the poor, widows, and orphans over ritual purity. The kingdom. Jesus spoke of God's kingdom, echoing Pharisaic concepts of divine sovereignty. So why the conflict? Jesus criticized the Pharisees, not because they were fundamentally wrong, but because some had become hypocritical, placing legal minutiae over compassion. It was an internal family argument, not a wholesale rejection. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, so you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. Matthew 2:32-3. Did you catch that? Jesus says, do what they teach. This changes everything. Notice, Jesus affirmed their teaching authority while criticizing their practice. This is crucial. Christianity survived because of the Pharisees. And here it is, The secret that changes everything. Here's the biggest secret of all. Without Pharisaic Judaism, Christianity would have died out. The stunning historical reality. When the Romans destroyed the temple in 70 CE, the Sadducees vanished overnight. Their entire religious system was based on temple sacrifice, and without the temple they had no purpose, no authority, no religion. But the Pharisees survived, and so did Christianity. Why? Because both had already developed a non-temple-based faith centered on scripture, prayer, and community worship. The synagogue model the Pharisees pioneered became the blueprint for the Christian church. Let that sink in. The very people portrayed as villains saved Christianity. Early Christians were predominantly influenced by Pharisaic thought. Paul of Tarsus was a trained Pharisee, Philippians 3:5. The belief structure of resurrection angels and divine judgment came from Pharisaic theology. The rabbinic method of interpreting scripture influenced Christian exegesis. The concept of a religious life outside temple sacrifice enabled Christianity's spread beyond Jerusalem. The gospel portrayal is more complicated than it seems. The Gospels were written after the temple's destruction during a period when Christianity was separating from Judaism. This context matters. By the time the Gospels were written, 70–100 CE, the Sadducees had disappeared, but the Pharisees, now called rabbis, were Christianity's main competitors for the loyalty of Jewish believers. This created a literary tendency to emphasize conflicts with Pharisees, while the real power players, the Sadducees and Roman authorities, sometimes got less critique. Historical evidence suggests Jesus' real conflict was primarily with the temple establishment, Sadducees, and Roman occupation, not with Pharisaic theology per se. The term Pharisee has become synonymous with hypocrite in Western culture. This is profoundly unfair and historically inaccurate. The Pharisees evolved into rabbinic Judaism, which preserved Jewish faith through centuries of diaspora and persecution, their methods of textual interpretation. Community worship and ethical living created a resilient religious framework that survived when temple-based worship could not. They were scholars, teachers, and spiritual leaders who genuinely cared about making faith meaningful for ordinary people. Were some hypocritical? Certainly, as are members of every religious group. But to characterize the entire movement this way is a gross distortion. Lessons for modern believers. Reform versus establishment. Progressive religious reform often comes from unexpected places and faces opposition from those protecting institutional power, wealth, and religion. When religious leadership becomes intertwined with wealth and political power, spiritual mission often suffers. Living faith. Religions that can adapt while maintaining core values survive. Those bound to specific institutions or locations often don't. Internal criticism. The harshest religious critiques often come from within, reflecting a desire for reform rather than destruction, beyond labels. Religious labels are complex. The good guys and bad guys are rarely who we think they are. So here we are, the secret that's been hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years. The ultimate secret about the Pharisees and Sadducees is this: the religious landscape of Jesus' time was far more nuanced than most people realize. It wasn't simply Jesus versus the religious establishment. It was a complex world of competing visions for Judaism, some protecting power and wealth, others genuinely seeking to make faith accessible and meaningful. The Pharisees, despite their portrayal in popular Christianity, were in many ways the heroes who preserved Jewish faith and inadvertently provided the framework that allowed Christianity to survive and flourish. The Sadducees, despite being less prominently criticized in the Gospels, represented a religious establishment more concerned with maintaining power than spiritual truth. Understanding this complexity doesn't diminish faith, it enriches it. It reminds us that, throughout history, the tension between authentic spirituality and institutional religion has been constant. The call to genuine faith over empty ritual, to justice over privilege, to compassion over law for law's sake. These themes transcend the ancient world and speak powerfully to our own time.